All right. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, everyone's got their sugar fix with the cookies on the side there. So we're going to begin our next portion. Our next speakers are going to be speaking about funding climate-proof water infrastructure. And with us, we have, again to be continued, we have Dr. Edward Saltzberg, Tribal Economic Development Leader, Sovereign Resiliency Partners, along with his panelists, Kevin Carter, Assistant to the Director of Water and Wastewater Services, South Florida. Excuse me. We also have Erskin Benjamin, Tribal Liaison for the EPA Region 4, Office of Water. And finally, we'll have Emran Rahaman, Director of Public Works for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. So without further ado, Dr. Salzberg.
Great, thank you. I think they're going to go right up there. Well, welcome again. So we put another panel together, actually two more panels. There's a hydrogen panel that's going to be convening right after this one. But resilience is not only about energy, so we wanted to put something together about one of the other critical assets that are on reservations and actually everywhere, and that's water. Water and energy go together. If you don't have water, it's hard to have energy because things have to be moved around and cooled, and without energy, you can't pump water up to where it needs to be. So there's a real symbiosis between energy and water. So we're going to do three things here from the three panelists. So Emran, who runs the Public Works Department here with the Seminole Tribe. You've heard of the Seminole Tribe. Great organization that has a lot of, been doing a lot of thinking in their planning. And he's going to start with resilience concepts, which I think are just really critical. Not just water, but water sort of at the center of gravity there, and how to think about resilience across a reservation from a public works standpoint. And then second, Erskin Benjamin has come down from Atlanta from Region 4. He's in the water office there. He was the tribal liaison in Region 4 before that. And he's going to talk about water funding specifically. And then we're going to wrap it up with Kevin Carter, who's with the Broward County Water District, who will be talking about some specific examples of how to use the funding effectively and how they approach resilience in that community, a major community here in Florida. But I want you to think about one question as you listen to what they're talking about, and maybe ask questions around this. How do you climate-proof your investments now? How do you make an investment that's going to meet the needs of the members of the people in the community now, while you're also making investments that are going to be resilient in the future? It's a really tough question, because if you only think about the way the climate is or the way the threats are now, you may make one set of investments, and those are appropriate for now, but you don't have an endless amount of money, and how do you make sure that those investments don't become stranded assets so that you build something that ends up underwater, or you build something, if you're in California, that ends up in a fire zone? And how do you then think about planning into the future so the investments you make now are resilient into the future? It's probably the toughest question, I think, that communities face, how to do that kind of planning. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emran, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Ed. I'll go ahead and take the clicker from you. And excuse me. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. First off, I want to thank thank Ed and the effort and the team that he put together to put together this group of panelists for us to speak on protecting and preserving tribal infrastructure and utilities when it comes to water, and climate proofing our facilities as well. One of the things I want to take is, Ed has given me 15 minutes to speak. Hopefully I'm able to get through this quickly. And hopefully you guys will be able to reserve all the questions after we get through the panel, and we can share some ideas and hopefully foster some other discussion there. I'm going to go ahead and skip the agenda item that's on here, because I'll be touching on each one of these items here. The first item I want to touch on is the sustainability. I want to thank Sherry Smith. She spoke earlier on on covering some of the smart development goals that the United Nations has set up. Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, he had initially established a sustainability meaning through ensuring prosperity and environment protection without compromising the ability for the future generation to meet their needs. We adopted the SDG goal in part of the tribe initiative here at the Seminole Tribe of Florida in building our infrastructure. And I'll go over and I'll share with the team here what is my role and responsibility, what are the areas that I have to be responsible for maintenance when it comes to infrastructure. So let me just talk a little bit about the sustainable development goals that the UN had developed. The sustainable goals it incorporates 17 broad goals that we took into consideration in our infrastructure development. And I think over the course of the previous presentation, I've seen some of these goals items has presented itself in some of the presentation slides. And these goals are holistically helping to balance the effect of the economy, the economics of the goals itself, followed by the socio component of it, followed by the economic, socio, and environmental. And these goals are to speak upon how do we better build a better infrastructure, help foster development and growth through that process. So these goals help to achieve that. It also helps for sustainability in the long term and making sure that how do we make sure we're thinking several generations ahead of us and ensuring that we meet the needs and plans for that. When it comes to public works and the infrastructure that we provide support to, this table here provides you an outline that here at the Seminole Tribe, I have 9 reservations, of which 4 reservations of ours have water treatment plant systems, wastewater systems, and solid waste. I'm also responsible for the infrastructure for transportation network within the community itself. It is not reflected in this table here, but in our network we have well over close to 400 miles of roadway network that traverse in and throughout our communities. And I will highlight and profile one of the roads for which we'll be pursuing some federal funding under the Bill Infrastructure Program to help us with development. But in light of that, let me share with you the reservations that we have. So these are 9 reservations that we have across South Florida. And these reservations accumulates to approximately just over 91,000 acres of land. And being able to support the reservation with infrastructural service is very challenging, especially when the reservation are not contiguous, meaning they're not conjoined as one community, and where it takes one group of folks to support each reservation. As we are here in South Florida, in the Hollywood Reservation. This property is not directly on the Hollywood Reservation itself. It's just a parcel that the tribes own. But the Hollywood Reservation just sits where the tribe have its Hard Rock Classic Casino, Hard Rock facility, followed by its residential community. And we have to provide support throughout the all the properties or reservation across South Florida. One of the new reservation of ours, which we've developed, we just started with a multi-housing development, which is our Lakeland Reservation. And that's just east, it's between Orlando and Tampa. And that community, we've just completed a 48 home development in the first phase. We're currently under construction for a second phase of housing, which encompasses another 25 homes. And with the full build out, it will encompass approximately over 150 homes. How do we take into consideration the infrastructure and the development that supports those facilities? And it's not just housing, it comes with recreational facilities, comes with educational, health, and so forth. No. One of the questions was, are the housing modular? The answer is no. These are concrete block structure homes. So what we have done in Public Works is that we have employed what they call the triple bottom line. It's a business concept that does not focuses on the financial performance. It focuses on it considers the social and environmental impacts into the development itself, adopting the sustainable development goals that the UN has incorporated. And as you can see here, we factored these goals into these bottom line components to make sure that we take all these factors into consideration. This consideration helps us make sure that we looked at across the board, how does it benefit the organization as a whole? Because infrastructure is not where we just look at it from a return, ROI standpoint for your return on investment. It's how do we make sure that it benefits, it leverage the infrastructure to make sure that it supports today's needs and as well future needs to our communities. And part of being able to deploy and employ all of the sustainable development goals in our project, we had to use an integrated planning approach. And our integrated planning approach was all encompassing and making sure that we look at the land use component, look at our utility systems, factoring into our water resource, and also taking into consideration the natural and cultural resource of the organization, of the tribe itself, to ensure that these are multi-layered resource that has to be factored into the development itself. When we make development on our reservation and you focus specifically on infrastructure, it affects everyone across the board. And this goes for anything as it relates to utilities, transportation networks, and so forth, because it creates an inconvenience. And it's our duty and my responsibility to make sure that, first off, we got to communicate effectively to the community what those impacts are, and making sure that we take an approach where we're looking at everything and we try to minimize as much impact to them. Because those economic impacts also has a cost related to the factor of impacts of services and delivery of products and goods throughout our community. So we have to take all that into consideration through that process. And part of how we in Public Works have taken into consideration the triple bottom line, I've kind of outlined here environmental, social, cultural, and economic. And I just want to share some examples of, I'll just pick one, which is our VFD in part of our environmental, is being able to reduce our costs by employing some VFD technology, which are variable frequency drives in our treatment plant operations. How does that help us? Within the tribes that I noted earlier on the maps, I showed you that we have communities spread out throughout South Florida. I have reservations which are in urban settings, and I have reservations that are in rural settings. The reservations that are in rural settings, we purchase our power from co-op electric companies, cooperative electric, and in purchasing those power, the cost that we're paying for power for those communities, we're paying upwards of anywhere between 14 to 17 cents per kilowatt per hour usage. Opposed to, in our urban setting, we could be paying anywhere between 8 and 10 cents per kilowatt per hour. Now, those are the things that I'm working on to making sure how do we help to reduce our operating costs in our facility, and also look at building a more sustainable power system to help us achieve that. Part of me sharing this the VFD is being able to share that cost helped us reduce significantly our power consumption use, not just in our operation of the treatment facilities, but also in the distribution of the system itself. I'll select the second item, which is the use of design standards. We've employed, in our organization, we've developed utilities standards, which helps us to make sure that we conform to some of the requirements in ensuring that our contractors, our designer and contractors, construct the facilities based on our utility requirements, based on the needs on our geographic location in our specific communities. With that being said, what that means is that we ensure that during construction, we have a very rigorous process in inspecting and ensuring that those facilities are secured. It helps us to reduce infiltration of the groundwater level. Here in South Florida, at 6-foot depth, we have groundwater, our groundwater level, our table is at that level, and that can create an intrusion into our system, which create more run times for our collection system pumping. So by us looking at minimizing all these impacts of reducing these factors of cost, it helps us reduce our overall costs. It also helps us promote sustainability through that effort, making sure that we're conducting thorough assessments of our system, making sure we're looking and reinvesting the money that we would spend in the repairs into building sustainable facilities into our utility itself. On the socio-cultural component of it, promoting the employment by making our community a little bit more resilient has been a very big challenge. In today's labor workforce, it's been very challenging just getting folks to be out there, especially in our rural community, to find a talent pool to come out to work in the communities. COVID has changed a lot for us. People have changed changed career. They have dynamically looked at doing things differently. Folks are wanting to work remotely. In our environment or our space, that cannot allow for that. You physically have to be in the presence of the operation of our utilities and facilities and making sure that you're physically having a eye-on approach on making sure that everything is functioning, working, and as intended and as needed to be for our community. So what we have done is, from the social component of it, is that we start implementing and developing cross-training for our staff to give them opportunities to better enhance their capability, provide more training, provide them technical resource and skill set to help build their capacity, which from a socio standpoint help them to be better operators, better employees, better program supporters for our communities. So it goes a far way when we look at making some of these developments in our community. The economic side of it, I'll touch on one, which has been the supply chain issue. I know everyone has been faced with it. One of the things that we have also recognized is that we cannot just stop to say, you know what, we're going to wait until the price goes down, because it's inevitable that we have seen over the years that costs keep continuing increasing. And that should not be where we look at and saying that, oh, let's hold off, let's postpone. We need the progress and the development to still continue. We still need to look at to say, where do we need to be at? Are we meeting our milestone and goals and getting there? So the intent here is to be able to effectively look at your plan and saying, start prioritizing your plan, seeing what could yield you the best result, and initiate those activities, because you will see from an economic standpoint, those are going to become some of your driving engines in the near future, and being able to meet some of the community needs there for that. So I did want to share that with you. Now, as a utility, we do have a series of challenges. Some of the challenges that we have, the geographic location of our facilities. We don't have the available labor pools. It's been very, very challenging with us getting folks out there. If you guys may be aware, 5 months ago, we had Hurricane Ian made landfall here in Southwest Florida, in the Naples Cape Coral community. That had pulled and extracted a lot of our resource pool out there for work in the construction and service industry. When we had any mechanical failures in our facility, just to get folks out there has been extremely challenging. And we've been struggling with that, but needless to say, we've been able to work with getting some of our manufacturers to come in and give team staff training to help us become more resilient in our response in our utility itself. Organic development and operation of staff, part of that is being able to organically identify staff in the organization and help promote them. Start building training capacity internally in the program, because our greatest resource in my organization or any utility, it is its staff. You have to have the staff that are capable and competent to make the needed improvements for your facility. Once they have the knowledge and you equip them with knowledge and experience, provide them with staff that has the experience, it will help grow and mentor them into becoming great leaders that will help ensure that they can take care of their facility respectively. So that has been one of the greatest resource I've been empowering my managers and employees in my organization to continue building upon. Lastly, on this item here, I have spare parts storage in each facility. You have to evaluate your facility and identify where you have risk factors. What risk am I willing to live with? I will tell you that ordering a pump, ordering a piece of equipment for our utilities, when we call a manufacturer or a vendor and they tell you that it's a 16-week lead time, it puts a lot of strain in thinking that if that piece of equipment goes down, how do you make sure that you can get it in a timely manner? And you have to evaluate that across the board. And it's the little things that you overlook that may get you in at some point. But you have to put your team to take a look at it, have workshop with them, workshop it, and develop a plan as to what are those critical components, and what is it that we can get, and if we can achieve it, let's secure it, because it'll help us meet our needs for the long term. So I ask everyone, take a look in your facility, in your operation, make sure you guys are focusing on working towards that. Now, with these challenges comes the development. We still have to continue with some of the sustainable development in our community. One of the things I want to highlight, I'm going to profile into now, is I'm going to be speaking on a pilot program that I've been working with through the federal government. And when I say federal government, the Department of Interior. I've recognized that under the Build Infrastructure Act or program that was funded last February, there's a lot of money that's been put into tribes. And one of the things that I've seen historically here at the Seminole and in my time here is that I've observed that from any infrastructure bill that has been approved by the federal government, it's not until year 3 or 4 is when the funds are made available to the tribes itself. By the time that the federal government asks for a plan to be put together, the implementation of submission of those plans, working with those federal partners or agencies to work through it. I recognize that prior to the Build Infrastructure Act getting approved, I've started internally having conversation with the team to identify how can we work with the federal government to build capacity and being able to achieve this. Achieve an opportunity of where these funds could be made readily available to tribes in a quickly and timely manner. So one of the things that I look at, and I'll just go over these bullets at a very high level. So one of the things that I'm working on right now as we speak is employing a one dig approach to meet tribal infrastructure needs. So what does the one dig approach means is that I just want to come into the community once. If I'm going to make an infrastructural roadway improvement, that roadway comprised of all the critical key infrastructure. And I will profile a video that will give you a highlight overview of that. And that video will show all the key facilities that comes in there. So identifying all the key utility infrastructure that comes in there. And what we've recognized is that under the Build Infrastructure Act, all these funding sits in multiple federal agencies, which is the Department of Interior, the Federal Highway Administration, or DOT, the Department of Energy, NTIA for the broadband and telecommunication, USDA for stormwater management, EPA for drinking water, Indian Health Service for sanitary sewer. So what I'll do, let me go into the video. So this video profiles the one dig approach, which is if we're coming into a community, the intent here is to disturb the area once, make one application to the federal government to identify all the needs and the requirements, and addressing all the opportunities of addressing, as you can see, the video profile, so many federal agencies, and all of them have federal funding that are tied to this particular improvement. How can we capitalize in utilizing the opportunity there to streamline all of that? I'm currently working with the Department of Interior through Ms. Hallen's office, in Washington to identify a contractual vehicle, which whether we use the Public Law 638, Public Law 477, or a government-to-government contract to enable this. The intent here is that if this is achieved, this will open a whole new landscape in really streamlining the federal funding opportunities for tribe. This will help expedite, and hopefully the need for spending the money could be expended a lot quicker than us having to wait on year 3 and 4 for the funds to be made available, for which we would have seen a lot of economic loss to those communities as well. I just want to leave you guys with my last thing. My last item is for guidance for other tribes, is that align your projects with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Find practical and sustainability solutions for your utilities. Utilities are a key component that provides all these vital services to the community. I ask that you take into consideration, take the integrated approach that we talked about, I shared earlier, that talked about the various components. Start working on developing that. That will help you guys achieve the objective and goals. Adopt and implement a sustainable strategy. One of the things is that we recognize that the cost for infrastructural services can be extremely expensive. Just keep in mind, you don't have to accomplish it in the first year or the second year. You could build it out over 5 years. And as part of you building it out for 5 years, it may take you 10 years to accomplish it, because it'll take you time to design it, construct it, and put it into operation. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you.
Great job, Emran. I really liked your talk, and you yeah.
Before we get to the next speaker. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Saltzberg. All right, so we have one question from online, Sharon Brown. She asked you, Emran, can consider water purification system in case of a natural disaster for your water treatment system? Question. So I guess she's asking, should you consider water purification systems in case of a natural disaster for your water treatment system? So I guess.
So
Yeah.
to answer the question from a resilience standpoint in our operation and utilities, we have built in multiple redundancy in our operation for water. As you guys are very aware, here in South Florida, we're in a hurricane zone area. Very prominently, when we do have a hurricane, we have power outages, we have impacts to our utilities. So what we have done is built redundancy and part of making sure that we have backup power systems that are put in place. And part of my effort now is being able to strive to build redundancy in the power system using alternative power sources such as solar, wind, and so forth for our communities. So those are alternatives that we're looking for as we speak. We have a redundant well system and treatment systems in our facilities. Thankfully, with the design and planning efforts for our community, we have had a lot of lessons learned, and we've implemented those lesson learned measures into our new designs for new communities and facilities that we're putting online. So, thanks.
Great. Good job. So Erskin Benjamin from EPA Region 4 is up next.
All right, so somebody wanted to talk about money, right? Here we go. So this is just a summary of some of the broader legislative pieces that are available in a drinking water context, and also wastewater too, but primarily we'll be talking about drinking water. And at the top, I've heard a couple of presenters talk about annually appropriated programs. So those are the programs that we generally have available to tribes and states and other eligible parties every year. So those are not special items, but the bipartisan infrastructure law obviously is. So that was something that that went into law, I want to say November 2021, and it in some cases took some old programs that we had and reinvigorated them. So if you all were familiar with the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act, that program had a little bit of funding in it, but then the bill came in and infused more money into that program. But it's, those are not, generally our annually appropriated programs. Then we have our so the WIN Act that's up there, Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. So that's one of our huge loan programs. I think Kevin will probably talk about city, some local work that has happened through that program. City of Atlanta, I think, also got some money under that program as well. And then our America's Water Infrastructure Act program also has about $25 million that's available to do climate change and resiliency work. And so, but the funding amounts that you all see up here for FY23, so those are what's been allocated to our tribes, except for the AWIA grant program at the bottom. So I think that one, we still don't have a tribal allocation yet. So that number, that 25 million that you see, is still state and tribal, but the rest of those numbers are just tribal allocation, and that's nationally. So depending on what region you're in, will determine what your specific allotment is. And yes, the top 3 of those programs too are also grant programs. So this is money that does not have to be repaid. So that's important. So there's about 8 drinking water programs to consider. I talked about annually appropriated programs. That top program at Drinking Water Infrastructure Grant Tribal Set Aside. So that's our annually appropriated program. So we get funding under that program every year. The supplemental to that program is a bill program. And then the lead service line replacement grant is also bill. The emerging contaminants program, that's new, that's also bill. The emerging contaminants in small and underserved and disadvantaged communities, also bill. And then we have just a general drinking water program that used to formerly be under our WIN Act, and that is also designed for small and disadvantaged communities. And then we have a reduction in lead in drinking water grant, and then the drinking water system infrastructure resilience and sustainability grant, which is under our AWIA Act. Okay. So the first 2 programs that I'm going to talk about includes one of our annually appropriated programs, which again is the Drinking Water Infrastructure Grant Tribal Set Aside program, and then the supplement to that program, which is the Drinking Water Infrastructure Grant Tribal Set Aside Supplemental Program. So in both of these programs, you can fund general, anything drinking water infrastructure related. Those are the types of projects that we're looking to fund under those programs. And that also means that if you have a resiliency project, again, these are 2 programs where you can execute that resiliency work. So new sources, treatment, if there's the program is broad enough to include planning, design, and construction. So if you don't, if your water system doesn't even have a clue on where to start, you can use these programs to do planning work, to figure out, do energy audits, those types of things that if you don't have that information, these are the programs that you want to target. If you already know, have some information on what it is that you want to do, whether or not it's, maybe you want to do some rehabilitation work to a storage tank, or maybe you want to rehabilitate some existing infrastructure. These programs, you can also do that work. Projects that we've had in the past, we've had tribes build administration buildings for the utility itself. So some labs like to have laboratories where they actually can run samples from the water system. So if you don't have that type of infrastructure, again, this is the type of program that you want to use. Okay, the next program is our lead service line replacement program. So you all have probably heard a lot about lead, and the agency's mission right now is to attack lead in drinking water very aggressively. And so one of the things that will come as a result of our new lead and copper rule will be all of the qualifying public water systems will have to conduct a service line inventory, not a lead service line inventory, a service line inventory. So that's really important. And the reason why I want to make the distinction is that even if your system doesn't have lead, or you think your water system doesn't have lead, we still need an inventory of the public water system, right? And so a qualifying public water system is going to be any community water system or any non-transient, non-community water system. And I wouldn't be coming from EPA if I didn't throw in something about, regulatory, something we have to, regulate. But unfortunately, the water system can incur a violation if you don't submit that service inventory. So I hate to do it, but I got to say it because it wouldn't be us if we didn't do it. So under the lead service line replacement grant program, again, if you're a water system that's looking to figure out, well, we don't even know if we have a problem, or some of you all may have even had a water system that was randomly sampled as part of the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs and Survey Assessment, DWINSA. Did any water system get picked tribally to participate in the DWINSA? Anybody know what DWINSA is? No? Oh, that's not good. Okay. Well, on the state side, states do a survey of their water systems every 4 years, and that's because, I don't even want to go into why that is, but unfortunately, tribes don't get that benefit. I think the last drinking water needs survey that was done in Indian country before the one that we just completed in 2021 might have been in 2011, I want to say. But it happens much more regularly for states than it does for tribes. But when it does happen, they use the same process. So we randomly pick water systems of different public water system strata. So you'll have some small systems that are in there. You have some systems that are above maybe 3,300, and then you have some systems that are above 10,000. And what we do, you all got picked, actually. Emran, you all got picked. Did you raise your hand? No? But yeah, what happens during the need survey is that we will ask certain questions about your 20-year capital improvement planning needs, and then you'll include those needs in a submittal to us for us to review, and then we take that information and we use it to allocate funding from the drinking water infrastructure grant programs that I'm talking about right now. And so if you talk to your region, your EPA region, and you ask them, well, why are we only getting $5 million for, this year? EPA said that there's, 168 million, or it's probably because of that need survey. If your tribe didn't respond to that need survey, it will affect how much money gets allocated nationally. So you have to respond to those things. It's voluntary, it's not required, but it has an impact, and unfortunately it has a 10-year impact, right? Because if your last water system didn't, if you didn't get an opportunity in Indian country to evaluate your capital improvement needs for the last 10 years, then even though it's voluntary, you want to take that opportunity to complete it. Under the service line replacement program, if you haven't developed a service line inventory yet, you'll want to do that as part of this program. And then once you identify the material composition of the service lines in your water system, and it shows that there are some lead service lines, you'll use this program to make a full service line replacement, lead service line replacement. So both what the utility owns and what the customer owns. And up here, just a couple of activities that are eligible under the program. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list. I just didn't want to have a completely crammed slide. So here's another program that will attempt to address the same thing that the lead service line replacement was. The only caveat with this program is that we're looking to target small public water systems. You all may see some of the funding programs talk about small public water systems, but on the state side, it's 25,000. For tribes, it's 10,000, so it's not the same. So if you see that number, you need to make sure that you're making the distinction that For small public water systems, we consider small public water systems on the tribal side to be water systems that serve fewer than 10,000, not 25,000. That's for states. So in this program, you'll be able to do some of the same things that are eligible under the lead service line replacement program. You just need to be serving a smaller public water system. Okay. Now we're going to turn our attention to emerging contaminants in drinking water. So this covers PFAS, even some contaminants that we don't have a national primary drinking water regulation for, like manganese. So some projects have been funded to address manganese. Okay. Uh-oh, I'm running out of time. All right. So the top program, emerging contaminants in drinking water, that program will look to fund programs that are fewer than, that don't have a population restriction. And then the program on the bottom, the emerging contaminants in small and disadvantaged communities, you want to target water systems that serve under 10,000. Here are some activities that are eligible under the emerging contaminants in drinking water program. So again, you can monitor for PFAS. You can come up with appropriate treatment technologies, and then again do construction work under that program. And this is some more information about our small, underserved, and disadvantaged communities tribal grant program. So again, this is a program that seeks to serve water systems that are fewer than 10,000. But some of these same drinking water infrastructure work that you can do under our basic drinking water infrastructure grant program can be done under this program. And then this is our sustainability program. It also targets under fewer than 10,000 customers for public water system. Relocation of existing drinking water systems are things that are eligible under this program. And then this is our wastewater infrastructure program. So I'm going to fly through these, unfortunately. And you all can ask me questions about the wastewater afterwards. All right.
Great.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Wait, Erskin. We do have a question. It happens just that quick. All right, so this is from a Zoom viewer. This is Mrs. Sharon Brown again. She's asking, same question for Mr. Benjamin. From EPA, is there funding for water purification in a natural disaster and or a permanent system for water treatment system?
Okay, so the best answer to that is we do have our programs do allow you to address resiliency, and I would consider that to just be a resiliency project. As a lot of people may know, you don't come to us if you have an emergency. You go to FEMA. You do not. You don't come to us if you got an emergency. We can't help you with an emergency. Yeah. But to have a water system that is sustainable and can be weatherized properly, we can look at eligible projects to support those efforts. All right.
Somebody leave their phone. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for those two excellent presentations, and I want to thank Ed. Ed invited me to come and join us today to give you a local story of South Florida. But let's give a round of applause for Ed. He was had the vision for all three panels today, and I really want to thank him on. And now let's turn to the audience. How many of you are from out of the state of Florida? Excellent, excellent. Well, let's give all the audience a round of applause. There's been some great questions, and so give yourselves a round of applause. Get our blood going here. On behalf of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, we thank you for your visit. And so I'm going to give the South Florida story, and as I go through it, there's going to be examples that may be directly related to your utility, maybe indirectly. I want you to keep in mind that the scales of some of our utilities may be different, but at the end of the day, delivering safe, reliable drinking water and protecting our environment with wastewater treatment is the same whether you're serving 10,000 people or 1 million people. And so I'm going to talk about partnerships, I'm going to talk about projects, and some funding that we have underway in Florida. I figure we have a pretty diverse group today, so let's just take a second and think about what the water sector utility resilient challenges are. We like to think of them as shocks and stresses. Shocks being sudden events, many of which you're all very familiar with. But when we think of stresses, this is one of the reasons we're all here today to talk about climate change. In South Florida, we're at the epicenter of rising sea level and groundwater levels, saltwater intrusion. Also changes in precipitation. Climate change is not just a coastal issue, and keep that in mind no matter where you are across the USA. And one that we have in Florida that is probably unique, or not unique to all states, but we have 1,000 people moving into our state every day. So almost 400,000 people a year, and that is a major chronic stress that we're dealing with in Florida. Ed talked about a definition of resiliency. Emran talked about sustainability. I really like this one. It's the capacity of individuals, communities to survive, adapt, and grow to no matter what kind of chronic stress and acute shocks they experience. I believe Ed used the term bounce back, and that's what this definition from the 100 resilient cities is meaning to say. And that group actually led to a community-wide resiliency effort in Miami called the Resilient 305. So when we talk about communities in South Florida, what really set us forward was back in 2010, we developed the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, also just known as the Compact. And President Obama at the time said it's a model not just for the country, but for the world. And it has been used now throughout the state of Florida. We have 4 other large urban areas that have taken on the strategy of the compact. And what it does is it gives the political will of your community to address climate change. Because when your leaders say, yes, we have a challenge, maybe in South Florida it's not even a challenge, it's a problem, an acute crisis coming at us, that filters down into the agencies, the private sector, your whole community. It started with a mayor's climate pledge, which really set the policy direction. And then there are, through the Regional Climate Action Plan, steps that each societal sector is working on. And in the water sector, I'm going to go through some examples. In particular, no matter what sort of challenge you are facing, you need to understand the science. You need to understand what the environment needs as far as your water infrastructure, because you can't build your infrastructure unless you know what the challenge is, the solutions to those challenges. And then I'm going to go through capital projects that we're using to achieve resilience. We've had a lot of discussion about funding, and I'm going to show you some of those funds on the ground. When it comes to science, there's a quiz at the end of the day on what all these lines mean on this particular map. But this is, you're looking at a picture of Broward County. If you look at the star, that's generally where we are. And those different colored lines represent saltwater intrusion coming into our groundwater. We are a groundwater-based system in South Florida. We get our drinking water from about 100 to 150 feet down in the ground. And over time, we are seeing saltwater come in. And so the green dots, which I don't know, it's a little bright, but all those green dots represent municipal wells. And there are many on the coastline that now are at risk. But now that they have this data to use, they can understand what sort of adaptation they need to do. The nexus between water and energy was one of the reasons I was really excited to get this invite. At my utility, we've developed a cogeneration facility where we take products from our wastewater plant and also fats, oils, and greases from local restaurants. So we're taking a waste stream and we're creating energy on site for our utility. And it can save us almost 25% of our electric bill. Also, it's going towards our goal of reducing our greenhouse gas footprint. Beyond wanting to be a good neighbor, protecting the environment is what we are all about. it saves us money, and it also helps with our long-term goals throughout our utility of reducing our footprint. And I'll mention one quick one that's come up. I'm glad to see the Sustainable Development Goals being referenced. And one, moving just out of Florida a little bit, in the Caribbean I do some work, and we're really looking at water loss reduction being coupled with greenhouse gas reduction. So think about that. It's a relative new idea we're working on, and we're hoping that it helps us get more money into tackling water loss. This is the slide I've been using for a couple of years from Miami-Dade County. This is the picture is 1,000 words. Miami-Dade Central District Wastewater Treatment Plant is out towards Key Biscayne. If you find yourself in Miami this week, that's just to the southeast of downtown. It's a beautiful place to visit. But you can see you can't get more vulnerable to sea level rise, storm surge, hurricanes. They are literally out at the barrier island. If you look at the bottom picture, this is the chlorine building. The old building's roof is in the background. The new design elevation is the red line. The new design elevation is the roof of the old building. All right? That's when you know you are at ground zero. I am going to talk about WIFIA just real briefly. Miami-Dade County has 3 WIFIA loans. And one of them is to enhance the resiliency. So if you ever think about going for one of these WIFIA grants, resiliency is certainly a topic and something you can put your money towards. In addition, we're back to that water energy nexus. Note that they've put almost a $326 million project forward to improve the electric capacity during a storm and immediately after, so that you can respond and be resilient. So it doesn't matter if it's 3.26 million or 362 million, electric and water go hand in hand, and the WIFIA program is certainly a way that you can do that. And I believe for systems under 25,000, the cap is like $5 million. So it is an accessible loan. It's not just for big cities. I'm not going to go through every one of these projects, but I did want to mention where the state of Florida is. So I was glad to hear some of our earlier presentations talk about state funding. I know Emran and I have had some discussions recently about it. The state of Florida is in generational funding for resiliency. This past year, there was over $500 million for projects, all societal sectors, for flooding and sea level rise mitigation. What you see on the map are projects throughout the state that water and wastewater utilities were able to get funds for. And Miami-Dade County in particular, down here in the bottom right, $27.5 million for septic to sewer conversion. And you're probably thinking, septic to sewer, how does that relate to resiliency to flooding? Many of our septic systems are along canals, they're along rivers. So it could be a similar thing in your particular state, or excuse me, in your tribal nation. If you have septic tanks that are near areas that are going to experience sea level rise, that makes their ability to treat lessen, and they become an environmental risk. And in fact, yesterday, my utility was able to get over $15 million for septic tank replacement in this year's round, and the governor announced he's going to put $400 million in next year's budget. So this is certainly a resilient golden time for the state of Florida. And last but not least, you may wonder about Hurricane Ian. Get to know your WARN systems, Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network. Ours is FLAW-WARN. After Hurricane Ian hit, we sent over 300 water utility personnel from around the state to get in there, get the water systems back up and running, once the power is on, get the wastewater systems back, and within almost a week, we had most of the Southwest coast back up and running. So definitely an important part, and that's another conversation that Emran and I are working on. And with that, conversations lead to solutions. Let's talk. Thanks to the Seminole Tribe of Florida for being the host, and thank you for coming to this very important conference. And Ed, I turn it back to you for questions.
You're a really good speaker, Tim, so that was just great. Are there questions in the audience? We have just about 4 minutes left. If not, I have two questions. One is for, is there a question over here? Okay, great.
Does EPA work with Indian Health Service on any of those grant applications for tribes?
So if the tribe elects to receive its funding as an interagency agreement, yes. If the tribe would just like for EPA and Indian Health Service to coordinate on a project proposal or idea, yes. However, the bulk of the coordination that happens is dependent on what the tribe wants, and you all get that option once your tribe has been notified of a tentative award notice. We give you all the option to select it as a direct grant, where you work primarily with EPA, or you can take it as an interagency agreement, and then we enter into an agreement with Indian Health Service, and then Indian Health Service enters into what's called a memorandum of agreement with the tribe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Oh, one way in the back, okay. I'm gonna, oh, here too? Oh, there's one way in the back also.
Okay, well, you're walking back there. I'll
Okay,
ask my
got that,
question.
all right. I'll get
I
back-
was
I'll get
wondering
back
if you
there.
all could go over some of the benefits of gray water, particularly because I think in many communities where water seems to not be a concern, they don't actually see any benefit to gray water. Do you all have any input on that?
We in the state of Florida for those of you who like baseball, the ball just got hit through the infield and we're not even at first base. We had a state legislation passed that incentivized for private systems to be able to put that in. So we are at a learning phase. My understanding is California is kind of the leader of that. Overall, if there's what we like to call a tool in the toolbox to help us deal with 1,000 people a day coming to our state, we're going to face a water shortage, and which is weird. We had 60 inches of rain a year, but certainly I can leave my card if I can find out more. But I know it's really new for our state. I don't know if you had anything else on gray water.
I could say that we can fund some of those types of projects. So if that's something that you all are interested in, some of those projects may be eligible. So
You will be regulated heavily, so let's put that out there. We had another question back here.
Yes, I did. This is for Erskin on your presentation for the funding under asset protection. You note about security cameras and SCADAs around, energy and telecommunications relative to the broadband or wireless. Are you funding those kinds of applications, or can you be a little bit more specific around the that is equipment, or can you elaborate on that?
yes, so projects that we've funded in the past have either centered around maybe cybersecurity or security of the facility. A lot of water systems need protection for maybe video surveillance of maybe intakes, or there may be a need for other type of security within the actual water treatment facility itself, right? Because people sometimes we tend to maybe ignore those facilities and not think that they don't need that type of protection. But software and hardware equipment, those things are eligible. So I certainly consider it if your water system feels like it has a need for it.
Erskin, does all the money get spent? Is there any of the, especially the tribal set-aside money, is that any of that get unallocated or unspoken for?
There might be some restrictions, but in general, though, the funding that's available for tribes tends to stick around a lot longer than it does for states. States, if they don't use it, it gets reallocated to the rest of the states that didn't use it, and the money that states turns away also gets reallocated to tribes.
To tribes.
But
Okay.
tribes get to keep their money a little longer. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I think we're out of time, but please thank the panel. I think they did a great job. Kevin, Erskin, and Emran. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are coming to the close of our day at this moment. We have 2 speakers left, I believe. We have
Yeah, they're both here.
Mrs. Okay, Grace
Yeah, Grace
Bochenek. Am I
and
pronouncing that correctly?
Roxanne.
Bochenek. Yes, I got it correctly. So you can come on up, and the floor is yours. Let me just get your presentation ready.
I'm going to go first, and then Roxanne.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Roxanne.
And we also have Roxana Becca Mohammadi. There you go, Becca Mohammadi. Did I get that correctly?
Close enough.
All right. Dang. Almost, but she's the executive director of U.S. Hydrogen Association.
Got a different slide up, though.
Oh, okay, this is not the slide.
What's up there?
Oh, I'm sorry.
This one.
I'm sorry. Let me get it right. And then start presentation. Yep. How's that? Good?
Good. I'm going to start.
Okay. Okay, Grace, take it away.
Well, I think I'll be
Oh, you're gonna,
next.
okay.
Yeah, I'm going to start it off. Well, I can just run this from here. Is that right? I have to use this? Okay. Well, welcome again. We're going to talk about hydrogen. Hydrogen is in the news quite a lot. There's a lot of money being spent on hydrogen. What's it all about? Why is there a big buzz about hydrogen? And so I'm going to do an initial presentation just talking about the hydrogen hubs, the money that's being spent, a little bit of background on hydrogen itself. And then Grace is going to, no, I'm sorry, Roxanne is going to follow me. Roxanne is the executive director of the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance, I think, not association. Got that right. And then Grace Bochenek, Roxana used to be an engineer. She's still an engineer, but she used to actually be a practicing engineer. Now she's dealing with regulations and trying to raise the sea level for hydrogen. So she works with state governments and federal governments and industries across the country. And then Grace Bochenek is the director of the School of Modeling, Simulation, and Training here at the University of Central Florida. She used to be the director of NETL, the National Energy Technology Laboratory. She was also acting acting
It's a tongue
secretary of the Department of Energy. So she's been around and had some major jobs in the Department of Defense as well. So I'm going to talk about what's the buzz about hydrogen, and I'm going to try to zip through this. I've got a lot of slides because I've done this presentation before, and the whole thing is really pretty interesting. But the main thing is, what's in it for tribes? Is there a real economic play here for tribes, and how do you get involved if there is? Did I go the wrong way? Okay. So I'm going to briefly talk about hydrogen. Why is it important? Where's the energy economy going? What should tribes be thinking about and doing? And then a little bit about an approach that we're using with the Osage tribe that we work with directly, and that we have a proposal submitted to the BIA to fund a hydrogen pathway for them, which aligns with what's going on across the country right now. Roxana then is going to look at the future and the current situation with the hydrogen economy, and especially when it comes to green hydrogen and fuel cells. And then Grace is going to talk about how universities can partner with tribes, can help tribes moving into a new area like this, and also generally collaborate with tribes and maybe address some of the issues that we talked about earlier, that Pilar talked about in terms of getting information out into tribal country, in which there are especially rural tribes and tribes that are not as well funded as other ones. So let me just move here. So why is the interest in hydrogen? Well, we're talking about decarbonization, and fossil fuels don't do a very good job of that. Electric vehicles do, but only if the source of the power is clean. So if you're charging your car with renewable energy, either because you've got solar energy in your house or because the grid is green, then that's good. But if it's not, then other sources may be needed. Also, wind and solar are not very dense energy sources. The problem we have as a country is that we've built our economy on a very dense, transportable energy source, petroleum. Just a little spoonful of gasoline in your car, you can go over a mile with that. I mean, it's just amazing what you can do with it, and getting off of that is really hard because the economy is built on it. In a lot of ways, it's not that we don't have enough energy, it's that we have the whole system built on using energy and continually using energy. Even if we get off fossil fuels into other energy sources, there are environmental issues or social issues that are generated because of them too. Electric vehicles are not exactly green-free because of the manufacture of the vehicles and also batteries. Hydrogen is better than that in a lot of ways. It's very dense. So you get a lot of power out of a little bit of hydrogen. It's transportable. You can pump it just like you can pump gasoline. So in a lot of ways, it can replace fossil fuels better than other sources of energy can too. And also, if you have a lot of excess electrons, you can take those electrons and split water with it, and water's hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen goes up in the air, and you can capture the hydrogen. And that electric power is then stored in the hydrogen molecule, and you can transport it. It's like a battery in a lot of ways. So it's a source of power. It's also a battery. It's really, really flexible. We make hydrogen now, and we use it across the economy. We use it for steel manufacturing. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a really bad cold. Ammonia fertilizer. So it's a feedstock, and it's used in industrial processes as well. It's used a little bit in energy, but what the U.S. government is trying to do is accelerate the use of hydrogen as a fuel source. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit in just a second. So hydrogen is created from a couple of sources, and almost any source that has hydrogen in it, you can create hydrogen from it. So wood chips, biomass of any kind. Methane gas is a real good source of hydrogen. Actually, it's the main source in this country. And also, you can split water. Hydrogen from methane is called blue hydrogen. And hydrogen from water is called green hydrogen because there's no pollution associated with it, splitting water, but there is in using methane gases. Excuse me, as that source. What the U.S. government is trying to do is bring down the cost of hydrogen, and I'll cover that just on the next slide. But let me just say that the applications for hydrogen are for the electric grid, trucks, energy storage, industrial processes, and buildings. So it's a great opportunity to go from just these things to those things, especially the energy parts here, which then take the place of fossil fuel. Okay, so what the U.S. government is trying to do is spend a whole lot of money to bring down the cost of hydrogen. It costs $6 or $7 per kilogram now, 4 to 10, depending upon how you're making it, where you are. But if we can get it down to $1 per kilogram, then it becomes a very economical alternative to fossil fuel. So all of this money, much of all of this money that's being spent by the federal government now on hydrogen in a variety of ways is to get that cost down. But getting the cost down is not enough, because you need the demand for that hydrogen. Right now there's a small market. I would say a large market, but not as large as it would be if there were energy uses for it as well. So in addition to the research that's needed on the process, I'm really sorry. I was really sick the last few days, and I thought I felt better. Okay. So the Department of Energy, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, has issued an RFP for, they initially issued it for about 10 hydrogen hubs, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. And that's a lot of money. If you look at $8 billion going to a few places, I mean, that could be as much as $1 billion each. What would you do with $1 billion if you were trying to use it effectively in a green energy, to develop a green energy market? So they advertised there were going to be 4 hubs, and thanks. and came out with an RFP, and they're in the process now of taking a look at the responses. And I mentioned the hydrogen economy, and this is just a depiction of what the hydrogen economy actually is. On the left over there, you've got sources of hydrogen, electrolysis, or maybe from methane, and then you've got to store it or move it or use it, because where you generate it isn't necessarily where you need it, so you can pipe it, you can truck it. And then there has to be industries that are going to be using it for fueling, maybe fueling planes, maybe heating industry, processes within industry, other forms of transportation. So this whole thing is the hydrogen market. And as I said, if you just fix the cost problem and you have cheap hydrogen, that doesn't mean you have a hydrogen economy, because you have to have all this other thing in place in order for there really to be an economy, which is the movement of goods from one place to the other, where they're made to where they're needed. This happens naturally, but, yeah, thank you very much. But that takes time. Could you just open that? That would be great. But, but that takes time. And we don't have a lot of time because we see Hurricane Ian and other things happening here in Florida, and we have to move more quickly. So that's why the Department of Energy is plugging $8 billion into this program to animate that market, and they're asking for proposals from consortiums across the country to explain how they're going to use that money to animate and raise this all aspects of this market up, so there's actually a market that's accelerated so that hydrogen becomes deployed across the economy. So let's see, typical production options. I'm just going to skip that. I think I've hit that quite enough. So what are the business applications? And if you look down the left, you'll see different kind of business applications. Engineering, business development management. This is what it takes to have an economy. And this is the hydrogen roadmap, going from detailed planning to permitting, development, installation, and then ramping up to operate it. And the proposals cover most, if not all, of the aspects of the market. And so then the question from a tribe should be, since all this money is being spent, and it looks like there may be a business that really is starting to accelerate here, where can you take advantage of it? If you're an oil and gas nation, certainly you could be a producer. If you have a lot of water, you certainly can be a producer. If you're close to an industrial center, perhaps you can start to develop an industry on your tribal land if that's culturally what you would like to do. So it's really an economic question. And I like to think of things in an economic development concept. I'm an engineer, but unless you've got something that's economically sustainable, then it really doesn't move forward on its own, and all the money doesn't really go anywhere. So from a tribal standpoint, it's not a question of should you get into hydrogen or not get into hydrogen. It's really a best and highest use land use issue. So if you do have land, or you do have assets, your question you should be asking yourself, is this a business that you want to get into because you see that it's consistent with your tribal values, that it's possible for you to get into it because you have the right resources and you have the right advisors like universities perhaps, and this could be a way for tribes to really advance their economic development. Okay, so this is another way to look at the hydrogen supply chain. It just breaks it down a little bit differently. Storage, moving hydrogen, applications, transportation, and then the support services all around it, economic analysis, legal services, and so forth. There are some natural places where hydrogen hubs make sense. So just sort of looking at areas that have a lot of oil and gas, that's one thing. And I'm not necessarily in favor of oil and gas, but it is one way to get hydrogen, especially if you capture the carbon and then sequester it. That's expensive, which is why more research needs to get done so that you get down to 1 kilogram, $1 per kilogram. But these are kind of natural places for hydrogen hubs to be maybe centered. But the market is bigger than just the hub itself. It's bigger than just the source of hydrogen itself. So the likely contenders, when the RFP went out, and I got this from a fellow I was working with in Oklahoma, these were the likely contenders because they had already taken a step forward, and there's some political reasons, like Joe Manchin was involved. There are reasons, there are public-private partnerships that formed. So these were the ones that were kind of in the news and talked about quite a lot in the beginning when the RFP came out mid last year. After that, the Department of Energy asked for letters of their technical approach. What is it called? What's that letter called? Letter of intent. It's called the concept plan, the white paper, the concept plan. So there's initial concept plan, very detailed concept plan, and they ended up getting 79 submissions, and they were going to do 10 awards. Let me just go on that. Here's 33 of the 79 that received encouragement letters from DOE, and I only know that because I read around it. These are the ones who've told us that they received letters. There may be some I've missed, but there's no central list at DOE. But these are the ones that we know were asked to move forward to the next stage, which is the actual proposal stage. That doesn't mean there's some that aren't on the list, but these are the only ones that self-identified as far as I could find out. So if you're near these places, you know something is going on. And I don't see Florida on here, but Florida did submit. No, it didn't? Okay, I thought it did. But, and so these are ones that have submitted, and if you're in those regions, it would be natural for you to find out more about it. But if you're not, that doesn't mean you can't be part of the hydrogen economy, because it's not all about the hubs, it's about what the hubs spark and what kind of markets grow up in those regions. So even if Florida is not part of a hub specifically, there's a lot of opportunity to be part of the hydrogen economy, and Grace is actually going to talk more about that. So I'm going to skip that one. Oil and gas tribes have an advantage, but that doesn't mean that advantage is going to pay off in the end. Tribes with water resources for electrolysis are not out of the money if you're near manufacturing, transportation routes, workforce considerations. So what you should be doing, seek out the regional leadership here, and you can just call your state office and ask, your state economic development office and ask. And then for the state of Oklahoma, we got involved in the development of their hydrogen task force, and we turned that into a proposal for the Osage Nation to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Department of Energy and Minerals Development, to develop a feasibility study for them that aligned with the roadmap for the state of Oklahoma. So if this is funded, that will launch the Osage tribe into this program, into the funding for the hub that may get developed around Oklahoma, in Oklahoma and in the surrounding states. But if not, it still prepares them to participate in the market otherwise, because it's not only the hubs that are going to dictate how the market develops. There's a lot of other things, and I know that Roxanne is going to talk about that as well. And with that, I know there are not enough tribes involved. Let me just say that. There are just not enough tribes involved in this. And I've been speaking about this at a few conferences, and I think there has to be more of a push from the government rather than or maybe a pull from the government to kind of get more tribes involved in the potential for benefiting from the hydrogen hubs. And I think Grace may spend a little time on that, how that could be done. So hope I didn't take up too much time. So Roxana, you're next to talk about what's going on in the marketplace in the future.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, everyone, I know it's the end of the day. You're so tired. You're dealing with the cookies. If we can take a quick second to get up, stretch a little bit, breathe, maybe, possibly, it's okay. I'll try to tap dance and keep you guys entertained. Thank you so much. Oh, perfect. Yes, good blood flow. I think it has something to do with like your health. I don't know how many years you'll add to it, but so glad. We've been here all day. It's been an amazing event. I actually appreciate a lot of people who've gone ahead of me. I'll try to be as good. They've covered a number of things that are relevant. Ah, there it is. Fabulous. I'm just going to have to figure out, is it left? Is it right? Let's see. Oh, no, it's right. Ta-da. Okay. So yes, my name is Roxana Beck Mohammadi. The second E is silent, kind of tricky. I am the founder and executive director of the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance. That is accurate. We were formed in 2020 to actually create a voice for hydrogen outside of the state of California. We took our lessons learned from California, and we basically went eastward, pioneer-esque, on a white horse, but eastward. And so we are a business trade association. We're a 501c6. We work mostly with hydrogen members or the hydrogen industry. But what's really important for us is that we are formed with integrity being very important to us. So we do actually put together policies that not only benefit our members, but truly benefits the entire hydrogen industry. That's really critical for us. And believe it or not, we do believe in common sense policies, even though I will admit I am from California. Ooh, these look so funny on here. Well, regardless, so we work on educating policymakers. We write policies from inception to basically the bill getting signed into law. And we do really like to think of ourselves as thought leaders. We like to be a couple years ahead. And so thank you, Ed, for discussing hydrogen hubs. What we would like to think of ourselves as being the entity that's 3 or 4 years ahead, trying to remove as much red tape for those hydrogen hubs to actually be successful on the ground. As probably many of you know, permitting alone is a bit of a nightmare. So with such a complex, I would say, I mean, these are entirely new infrastructure, period. Infrastructure is kind of an understatement to really talk about it. The undertaking with the hydrogen hubs, really we're building the production, the distribution, all associated with infrastructure, as well as the end uses simultaneously. So we are also doing the strategic planning across the states in order to make sure that the hydrogen economy is successful. So I think you all, we've talked about it so much, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed and signed into law November 15th of 2021. And so after that, that's when we went national. We were originally the Western States Hydrogen Alliance. So people always ask why hydrogen, and I always like to respond, there's 8 billion reasons to like hydrogen. So yes, and I know Ed just referred to the hydrogen hub money, but unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I end up being everyone's instructor. What is hydrogen? Who is hydrogen? And so I'm stuck coming back to who this little guy is. Hydrogen is the lightest element on the periodic table and in the universe. Everyone has a relationship with hydrogen, you just don't know it. So I'm really excited to tell you about how well you know hydrogen. The universe is comprised of hydrogen, 90% of it. So we're talking about everything we know is comprised of hydrogen. The sun, the reason all of the energy that we get to enjoy is because of hydrogen fusion on the sun. Hydrogen is what propelled us to space. It was what propelled Apollo 11 to the moon. 10% of our bodies is comprised of hydrogen. Hydrogen is also what removes sulfur from our crude oil. Hydrogen is the reason why we don't have acid rain anymore. Hydrogen is the main component of nitrogen fertilizer, which feeds 80% of our population. So if you don't know who hydrogen is, he's been acting in the background, being very much integrated in our lives. So now what is happening, I give him like a masculine vibe, I don't know why, but hydrogen is coming to the forefront into the retail space, into all of our lives, because it can do that. It can actually provide a lot of advantages to our current energy systems, but also into the next phase of our clean energy and transportation systems. One thing I really enjoyed earlier was the fact that Mehdi actually brought this up earlier, which is the fact that we have to look at our energy systems as being integrated. So when you're looking at a battery system there, or you're looking at, you know, a solar array there and some wind, fabulous. I'm so glad that you're looking at all of those options. but really we should be taking an integrated approach to energy always. Why? Because we should probably have some redundancy. We should probably optimize our costs as well as other benefits that we can receive. So I think that there's been a lot of conversation about electrification and decarbonization. Those are all really critical, but I think we need to bring it back to sustainability and reliability. So I don't know how familiar all of you are with this, but essentially this actually explains the interconnection with hydrogen and everything we know. And this is the Department of Energy's H2 at scale depiction. And so we can utilize hydrogen to produce power. We can utilize it to produce fuels for our vehicles of all sorts, off-road, on-road, in the air, in space, all of the above. And we can actually utilize it to extend nuclear, natural gas. I know this is going to sound very controversial, oil and coal, solar and wind. And there are 14 different ways of producing hydrogen. And I really don't like the color schemes, I'll be honest with you, because it's really denying the fact that we can produce hydrogen from multiple pathways, including plastics. So when we're talking about our sustainable communities, when we're talking about water, conservation, and other factors that actually are part of our daily lives that we're kind of ignoring sometimes, hydrogen can play a solution. So I'm really glad that energy security pretty much came up, or in cybersecurity with our systems. That is something that we're not looking at enough. I work with a former, basically a state senator who is a former, or is a vet, but was formerly with the Pentagon. And she's always really, really concerned about this and has talked about how 9/11 didn't happen the same day. It took decades of planning. And so we really need to be concerned about having redundancy in our energy systems and being sure that, you know, if anything goes down, that we actually have multiple pathways. Economic prosperity. There's a lot of economic opportunities for us with respect to adding in a new revenue stream. So you can take the assets you already have and can potentially add hydrogen as being an additional revenue stream, or build an entire economy around it like the hydrogen hubs is allowing. I've brought up redundancy. We've talked about resiliency as well. I don't know if I need to kill this one, but it's very critical for us. We see that there's a great number of jobs that can be produce, as well as greenhouse gas emission reductions, et cetera, et cetera. I thought it'd be more entertaining here, but I'm gonna try to move through these really quickly. The reason why hydrogen is really important is because of the curtailment of solar and wind. Those are intermittent assets, and so hydrogen allows us to store that valuable solar and wind power for longer periods of time. So when a battery starts discharging the energy that it just started storing about 4 hours before, we now can utilize hydrogen to store that electricity in a different form, of course, but for seasons, which is very critical for us. Ed went over essentially something like this, which is basically the hydrogen ecosystem and how they're all interrelated. This is very much similar to the DOE schematic that we saw earlier. This was the seasonal energy storage that I was discussing. So we can store massive amounts of hydrogen in these underground caverns. And so this one in particular is the size of the Empire State Building. This is what we're seeing being utilized in Utah. We can produce power on a distributed scale. I wouldn't say that we'd like to do anything under 100 kilowatts, but it is feasible, as well as multi-megawatt systems. This is going to be really critical at places that require a lot of electricity, but it would require so much money in order to upgrade their systems. So essentially, let's say we're at a seaport, and it's going to take them $100 million to increase their capacity at the port in order to support more let's say electric vehicles, or all of a sudden they have onshore power for their ocean-going vessels that are coming in. And so there's a way for us to, in a sense, almost create a distributed system that can be on the grid at that port. It's the same thing with any other heavy-duty application. So actually, I should take that that opportunity to let you guys know that kind of when we think about electrification, hydrogen really does well at scale, the big projects. When we're looking at smaller things, smaller demand, it makes sense for electricity and battery electric vehicles. And so, and it's also much more cost effective that way. Once we start looking at larger scale electricity and laying down new electrical infrastructure is much more expensive. So we have resiliency that we can add to the grid. I'm just thinking about Hurricane Sandy, where hydrogen fuel cells were able to provide power during a time of excessive need. So a lot more helpful than the regulator earlier. So a fuel cell can walk in and help you out there. There's a number of different pieces of equipment that's operating today in the US. We have nearly almost 100 fuel cell electric buses that are operating across the US. We have stationary fuel cell generators, as well as forklifts and other vehicle types. So this is our way of decarbonizing freight, and that is a huge air quality piece. And so with some folks that might have rail that's going through their property, or they have trucks that are adjacent to essentially their grounds, they are mitigating air quality contaminants and carcinogens via fuel cell electric power systems. And the reason for that is that, the joke is in the freight sector that, you're either moving batteries or cargo. And it becomes an issue when you're trying to move that many batteries when you are trying to electrify your heavy duty equipment. These are more examples of different equipment types. The fuel cell bus on the top left is actually operating in Coachella Valley in California. The fuel cell ferry on the bottom is actually operating in San Francisco Bay. We have a forklift system to the right, and then a hydrogen fuel cell truck at the top right. And these are all solutions that exist today. We're also looking at heavy off-road equipment. So mining was brought up earlier today. We think that we can absolutely electrify mining equipment, farming equipment, any kind of tractors that are on, like at ports or any other kinds of heavy-duty applications that are not on surface transportation. And this is kind of one of the most important pieces here, I would say. It's about our national security, and it's about lives on the ground. And I think that hydrogen is reintroducing the concept that we could be completely energy independent. And we fight overseas for our energy assets, and we simply could really be diligent, do the systems engineering, and think systematically about how we use our resources. And I promise you that if we just used our waste properly and used a diversity of energy solutions, that we truly could be energy independent. So I would welcome everybody to look at a host of different solutions. I don't say that hydrogen is the only solution. I think hydrogen is part of many solutions that ensures that we have a diversified energy portfolio. And I welcome you to really look at it in an artistic manner. It is a mosaic, and we're all architects, and it's all going to look a little bit differently in all of our applications. But again, I encourage you to get creative. These are a bunch of funding opportunities that Mr. Clancy covered earlier. So I'm going to hand it over. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. See if I can, okay, lock the doors, no one leaves. You got a crazy professor here. 45 slides later. No, we won't do that to anyone. I hope it's going to be a little interactive. I hope, you know, it's like bases are loaded and I'm up, right? And I see everybody like wanting to get to wherever we're going. But today's an opportunity. I think forums like this, I can't thank the Seminole Tribe of Florida for the invitation to be here. I think it's so important to be part of the conversation, and for all the tribes across the nation that are here today about a really important topic around energy, around how we're all moving forward. And so there's a couple things as I've been listening to the talks that I just thought I would throw out there. And if you walk away with anything but a couple of these nuggets, maybe that would be a great thing. First of all, I think you heard a lot about energy, security, national security, how we are protecting our electric infrastructure that we all rely on, from relying on in our homes, in our businesses, in our banking systems, so critical. And coming out of the Department of Energy and now at the University of Central Florida, I agree with all of the comments that say, you know, first of all, energy is regional. It depends on what resources you have, what industries you have. And so every region really has to think about their strategy and what their strategy is. And thinking about how that strategy changes as technology is changing is really important. And I think that's where potentially universities can help think about that. So why a modeling and simulation person is here in energy is just that. You really have to be able to model and understand where you are today and where you want to go. So that's one point. The second point I wanted to make is you heard a lot about this entire clean energy economy and the idea of the value of the clean energy economy. And I was so happy to hear the presentations I was able to participate in here about it's the value stream. It's not about producing it. It's about what you do and how you might distribute it. And there's a whole industry around how you would distribute such a resource, and then about its use in a lot of different industries, as we just heard. So there's a whole value chain that I think the tribes, and when you think about your regional strategy, where do you want to be? How can you contribute, and where can you capitalize, in other words, to help this economy kind of move forward? You heard a lot about federal resources, and I'll cover some of them, and they were talked about earlier. But there's resources out there in the federal government, both in the Department of Energy. We heard from EPA. It's part of the national strategy, energy and energy independence and energy security. So there's resources, and I think most of those resources really require the kind of partnerships that come between communities, industries, academia, that deploy this capability. I would also add that at the end of the day, it's about education and it's about the workforce. This future is a different future. And so there's a role to be played when we think about what does that workforce of the future look like. So if that's it for the day, that's it for the day. You've seen this slide a lot. We all keep going back to it, and there's a whole report on that at some point if you ever want to read, but it really does depict what the opportunity is. It goes back to that value stream. You can't just produce it. Yes, it's going to help support the diversification on the electrical grid, but look at all of these opportunities, right? And you're going to hear me talk about some of those opportunities as they impact Florida. Another view, and this probably was covered a million times, so I don't really have to talk about it, but in this move towards a cleaner, is it just clean energy? It's about decarbonization. It's about new technology. But any way you go to try to think about scaling, scaling this transformation, about accelerating, all of that means there's got to be a partnership, a public-private partnership between industries that are building these capabilities and technologies, communities like yours, And then potentially partnerships, again, with universities to help accelerate all of those pieces. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for the direction that the country is moving. And from our view, it's all about how do we, as a university, be a partner in that? How do we support the decision-making and policy that help drive it? How do we build the technologies that have these larger societal impacts? So one of the things we've been doing at the University of Central Florida, and there's a couple of them, but we've been, recently we hosted a hydrogen forum on campus, and it was a forum between Mitsubishi Power and the University of Central Florida, and we had an opportunity to have Jennifer Wilcox, who's the head of the Office of Fossil Fuels and Decarbonization, and I know they changed their name, so it might be a little bit different, but to come in and talk. And the reason I'm only bringing this up is, again, it just revalidated, the conversation revalidated a couple points that I made earlier. One is we need to be able to team, because industry needs to be able to team to help move technologies into communities. It has to be looked at holistically as an energy infrastructure decision, and then there has to be this whole workforce piece. And so the conversation was really around that and around how we can kind of move forward. So one of the things that we're doing in Central Florida is really thinking about a Central Florida hydrogen hub. Now, we weren't one of the recipients of the DOE hubs that you brought up, but there's still opportunities, and I'll be able to share some of that with you in 1 second. So again, this is a little depiction, and hopefully in the back maybe you can see that it's probably pretty difficult, but so we're kind of in Central Florida, but let me just depict what's around us and why some of this might be critical for hydrogen. First of all, Florida, in the middle, at least the middle of Florida, right, is very agriculture intensive. Hydrogen is a good source for fertilizers and for what's needed in the agricultural business, number one. Number two is we just happen to be in Florida in a hub where, and let me start with, people like Disney and Universal and theme parks, right, who are all trying to move towards the clean energy transportation systems. You showed the buses, you throw other transportation opportunities. So now we have coupled together two different industries, agriculture and entertainment and theme parks. Well, guess what? You come up to the coast over here where, now all of a sudden we have Blue Origin, we got Northrop Grumman, we have all of the space activities that are occurring every day. I mean, I live up there, and there is launches. Seems like there's a launch every other day. What do they need? You mentioned it. They need hydrogen. So now we got three. That's pretty cool, right? If you step back and you just think about all of this other parts, you have a very heavily aerospace defense industry across Florida, and actually moving up to the Panhandle, all the way up to the other parts of the southeast region. Okay, well, clean energy and some of the usage they need on their installations and how they're moving forward in some of their vehicle and their platforms. Well, that's pretty interesting. But it's really interesting is all these companies. You'll see these companies, Mitsubishi, you have Siemens, you have a lot of the very strong traditional power companies are here in Florida also. And so there's been a lot of conversation amongst all of these players about how would we move forward with a kind of a Florida, Central Florida, Southeastern region hub. And so my offer and my opportunity to come here was to share with you, you can be part of that conversation, you can be part of the team. We're thinking about all these things. And in some ways we're thinking about then the educational component to all of that, right? and we'll see how we kind of work through it. But there is an opportunity, and this opportunity is something that comes out of UCF, out of the College of Engineering and Computer Science, and out of the School of Modeling and Simulation. Again, why are we doing this together? Because we have to be able to model a lot of things, everything from logistics to the generation to the distribution. It's early in this conversation, and hopefully when we start having some of these really important meetings, we can invite and have you be part of it. And I should also mention, we have the utility companies who I know are here today who would all be a part of that kind of larger conversation. So I'm going to shift a little bit around modeling and simulation because it gives you another perspective of the region and the opportunity for the tribes. I think there's a workforce and education piece. One of the things to note, just in Central Florida alone, you have we're like the gem of the country in terms of modeling and simulation, and that's why we can apply it to energy, we applied it to training, we apply it to the Department of Defense, and there's this whole ecosystem, which is pretty important. And there's a lot of money that's being spent in that ecosystem. And this is defense spending, this isn't energy spending. So again, there's an opportunity for us to think about this hub and these industries and how we may want to work together. Another way to think about modeling and simulation is this. If you see on the right side, we do a lot of crazy stuff. You'd have a lot of fun if you come visit, right? We'll put you in a virtual reality device. You can go walk around, and you could be on a Schlumberger oil rig, and how they train and how they go through their process for qualifying their operators. I didn't know this, but for Schlumberger, there's only one physical training facility, and I think it's in Abu Dhabi. And so there's no other way to train except through these kind of virtual techniques. And so VR, a lot of advanced modeling, you keep hearing about all this computation and data, all of this energy infrastructure is, especially when you start thinking about cybersecurity and all the information and data flows, is a tremendous amount of data. And so our ability to use artificial intelligence to understand and manage that data is important. And so we do this kind of technology, but we're applying it. We apply it to defense, and in this case, for this discussion, energy. Let's see. And that's it. We're trying to build a future. And the future is with you. So my ask is, what could the opportunity be? How could we be involved? For me, this was the first engagement, with the tribal nations, and I think there's just a tremendous opportunity. The university is a good partner in the sense that, again, if you have a strategy or you want to build a strategy, I tell you the success ingredients, especially when you think about from the Department of Energy's perspective, they are looking for a community, an application. They're looking for universities to partner in there, and then they're looking for industry. So they're looking for that synergy, and I think that synergy starts here. So I thank you all for sticking it out. Hopefully, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to. I will leave some cards and anything that we can do to just talk. It could be, hey, we do a lot of Zooming nowadays, so we don't all have to be right next to each other. So thank you very much.
So let's turn to audience questions. If you raise your hand, if you have something, okay. One here. Anyone else? And we'll move the mic down.
This question is for you, Dr. Saltzberg, actually. You had mentioned that there were 79 hubs that were submitted and 39 letters of encouragement, but limited involvement from tribes. Were there any tribes involved in any capacity with any of those hub teams?
I certainly can't speak to all of them, but I do know that I was at a meeting in which it was kind of news to tribes that this was going on. This was not all that long ago. I know even in Oklahoma, where I have been active, the tribes are not as involved as we think they should be. But that doesn't mean you can't get involved. But you can't wait for the phone to ring. If you're a tribe and you're interested in just pursuing what's going on in your region, you can't wait for the phone to ring. A good way to find out about what's happening in the region is to call the Department of Economic Development, whatever that's called in your state. But also the larger universities are generally involved in those regions. So University of Oklahoma in Oklahoma has taken the lead, and they are doing the outreach to tribes. But I haven't seen it to be as effective as I think it could be. I think it's still putting a number on a wall and saying, call this number if you're interested, rather than a more aggressive outreach from the hubs. So,
I don't know if anybody could hear me. I think some of those pilots and those regional projects, you could see how complex a number of companies involved. The number, that takes a lot of planning, is my point, in order to successfully pull together a proposal like that. Because you have to have all those elements. You have to have the rationale for why you want to build the hub, how the hub is going to develop, the industry piece of that. So there's all these elements, and so my recommendation is for anyone who thinks the universities are probably a good source, you're a great source, but we couldn't come together and have a conversation and see how we can help,
I'll just add one more thing that I should have mentioned earlier. Just because they applied, they're the primes, right? But these people need to build infrastructure. They need to manufacture. They desperately need a workforce that doesn't exist. I don't know what happened to everybody. So it doesn't mean that you don't have an opportunity to play a role. If anything, you might be the most vital player here because you have access to additional grants that can help provide cost share. You can't do federal dollars with other federal dollars, but there's a lot of different opportunities. So I wouldn't be sad if you've missed out supposedly yet. I think it's getting hold of those hubs. You can obviously reach out to any of us, and hopefully we can connect you with the right people.
yeah, that's really an excellent point. I'll give that to you in just a second. The funding for the hubs is multi-year, and it's going to get a slow start. So that getting involved, it's not too late to get involved. I think that's what Roxana was saying.
And presently, the MHA nation has moved forward with a proposal with one of the hubs up there, and they're going to supply methane for that project. So there are tribes moving forward. There's just not enough of them right now. And it doesn't mean that you have to be somebody with oil and gas. I mean, it could be almost anything, as Roxanne was make mention.
Okay, any other questions? One back there.
Go to you first.
If I can just echo what Grace was saying, we're working very closely with University of Central Florida, working with Florida Solar Energy Center. What a resource. And it's a resource that Jim Fenton, of course, I was over there last week talking with him. He's very active in the Hydrogen Society. That's one of his prime interests. And so just echoing that, kudos to what y'all are doing.
And I think there's one other question.
Yeah, it's just a comment. So I'm president of the Redding Rancheria's Economic Development Corporation, and we've just partnered with a group to build a manufacturing facility that will produce hydrogen out of woody biomass coming out of the forests and stuff in California. I don't know if everybody here knows about all the fires that we have every year and stuff, so we're moving forward on trying to clean up some of these forests and put all that woody biomass to good use. Great.
Okay, so hydrogen has a future. We're just not quite sure about it yet. We've got a ways to go with the hub part of it. You're convinced? Well, it's here now, but to get it accelerated up, there's a lot of opportunity here to scale it up so that it's really making a difference, because solar and wind are intermittent. I personally don't think we're going to get there just with solar. I think we need more storage and more high-dense fuels to replace fossil fuels that have to come down. So I think that's the last question. I want to thank our panelists. Great job. And
thank you to all of our presenters and all of our instructors that were so gracious to present today.